Hey there, friend. Grab a cup of something warm and settle in. This isn't just a story, it's a journey back to a time when life felt a little simpler, when the world still surprised us with its quiet miracles. Picture the vast Nevada desert, where the wind hums like an old lullaby your grandma used to sing, and the stars burn bright enough to make you believe in destiny. This is the tale of Michael Cooper, a forest ranger left for dead, and the wild Mustangs who rewrote his fate. It's about empathy, survival, and a connection so deep it'll make you rethink what it means to be human. Ready? Let's step into the dust and hoof prints of a story that'll stay with you long after the last word fades. The Nevada sun was merciless that spring of 2024, baking the cracked earth until it smelled like forgotten summers, dry sagebrush and a faint whiff of pine from the distant hills. Michael Cooper, a forest ranger with a laugh as warm as a porch swing's creak, was out patrolling a remote stretch of wilderness. He'd always felt at home here, where the only sounds were the skitter of lizards and the soft thud of his boots on dirt. But that day, trouble found him. Cazadores furtivos, poachers with no regard for life, ambushed him, tying him to a gnarled juniper tree with rope that bit into his wrists like regret. They left him with nothing but a busted radio and a fading hope. Survival wasn't just a word now, it was a fight against time. For 30 hours, Michael endured. His throat burned like he'd swallowed sand, and the wounds from the struggle throbbed. With every heartbeat, the desert night crept in, cold as a stranger's glance, making his teeth chatter. He thought of his dad's old harmonica, its reedy wail a memory of safer days. Would he ever hear music again? Delirium whispered doubts, but a faint rustle snapped him alert. Something was coming, not with menace, but with purpose. Hooves drummed the ground, steady as a heartbeat. What was out there in the dark? The first Mustang appeared like a shadow given life, its mane catching the moonlight like ripples on a forgotten pond. Michael's heart lurched, not from fear, but from a flicker of hope. These weren't just horses. They were wild, untamed spirits of the West, and they were watching him. He'd seen Mustangs before, always at a distance, but this was different. Their eyes held something human, something that felt like compassion. Why weren't they running? As the herd drew closer, Michael's breath caught, tasting the dust they stirred. A gritty reminder he was still alive. The lead stallion, a coal-black beauty he'd later call Midnight, snorted softly, his breath warm against Michael's cracked lips. It was as if the universe had decided he wasn't done yet. But what could wild horses do for a man tied to a tree, bleeding and half gone? The night stretched on, and Michael's mind wandered to childhood, racing his sister to the creek, the splash of cold water on bare feet. He didn't know it then, but those Mustangs were about to teach him a lesson in humanity no book could hold. Their next move would change everything. Can you feel that moment, the chill of the desert night, the faint hope in Michael's chest? What do you think those horses saw in him? The desert morning broke with a hush, the kind that reminds you of waking up in your grandparents' house. Soft light spilling through lace curtains, the world still half asleep. Michael Cooper was barely holding on, his body slumped against the juniper's rough bark, which scratched like a memory of climbing trees as a kid. The Mustangs hadn't left. That alone was a shock. Wild horses don't linger near humans, not out here where trust is as scarce as rain. Yet there they stood, their breath puffing in the dawn chill, smelling faintly of sweet grass and freedom. Midnight, the coal-black stallion locked eyes with Michael, and it felt like communication without words, like the universe was whispering, "You're not alone." Midnight stepped closer, his hooves crunching the brittle earth, a sound like the snap of kindling before a campfire's glow. Then something unthinkable happened. The stallion dipped his head, and from his muzzle dripped water, precious, cool drops that landed on Michael's parched lips. It tasted like life itself, sharp and pure, pulling him back from the edge. Other Mustangs followed, each offering the same gift, their wet noses brushing his face like a mother's gentle nudge. How did they know? Scientists would later argue over this, but in that moment, it was pure empathy. As the sun climbed, the desert's heat returned, carrying the faint tang of dust and distant sage. The Mustangs didn't just hydrate Michael. They pressed close, their warm flanks shielding him from the night's lingering cold. It was as if they understood survival in a way humans often forget, sharing their heat like neighbors dropping off a casserole in tough times. Michael's mind drifted to his old dog, Rusty, who'd curl up beside him during thunderstorms. Same feeling, different species. But why were they risking so much for a stranger? The herd's behavior grew stranger. Still, Midnight snorted, tossing his head, and two younger mares broke away, galloping toward the horizon. Their hoofbeats faded into a rhythm that echoed the tick of an old kitchen clock, steady and purposeful. Michael didn't know it yet, but they were on a mission. The remaining Mustangs stayed, their presence a quiet promise, their tails swishing like the rustle of pages in a well-loved book. It was compassion in motion, raw and real. By noon, Michael's strength flickered, but the Mustangs' resolve didn't. They stood watch, their shadows stretching long and lean across the dirt, like sentinels from a story his dad used to tell, about loyalty that defies reason. What were those mares running toward? Imagine those Mustangs choosing to stay, choosing to care. Ever had an animal surprise you with a kindness you didn't expect? The desert afternoon hung heavy, thick with the scent of sun-warmed clay, like the pottery wheel Michael's aunt used to spin on lazy Sundays, her hands shaping something beautiful from nothing. Michael Cooper was fading, his body a map of bruises and rope burns, each pulse a reminder of survival teetering on a knife's edge. The Mustangs, though, hadn't wavered. Midnight stood closest, his dark coat gleaming like the polished wood of an old radio that once crackled with baseball games. In Michael's childhood, those horses weren't just lingering. They were thinking, planning, moving with a purpose that felt like intelligence carved into every step. How do you explain a wild animal choosing to save a man? One mare, her coat the color of burnt sugar, began pawing at the dirt near the juniper. Her hooves scraped with a rhythm like the clatter of dishes after a family dinner, steady and sure. Then, a miracle. Water, muddy but real, bubbled up from the shallow hole she'd dug. Midnight nudged Michael's face toward it, his muzzle soft as the worn quilt on Michael's old bed, urging him to drink. Drop by drop, they hydrated him, their empathy as clear as a handwritten letter from someone you thought you'd lost. Who taught them this? The Mustangs' actions went deeper. As the day cooled, they formed a tight circle around Michael, their bodies a living shield against the wind that whistled like a distant train. Lonesome, but alive. Their warmth seeped into him, steadying his shivers, reminding him of his mom wrapping him in a towel after a swim in the creek. This wasn't instinct, it was cognition, a choice to protect one of their own, even if their own was a human they'd never met. But what drove them to such lengths? Then came the strangest part. Midnight snorted, sharp and commanding, and a young colt broke from the herd, galloping off with the urgency of a kid chasing a runaway kite. The others stayed, their eyes flicking between Michael and the horizon, as if they knew help was a long shot but believed in it anyway. It was communication without words, a trust so pure it made Michael think of his dad's quiet nod when words weren't enough. Those horses were organizing. How far would their plan reach? By dusk, the sky burned orange, streaking the desert like the glow of a lantern left on for someone coming home. Michael clung to consciousness, anchored by the Mustang's steady breaths, each one a promise. The colt was gone, the mares from earlier still missing. Whatever they were doing, it felt bigger than chance, like destiny had hooves and a wild heart. Where were those runners headed? Picture those Mustangs working together, thinking, caring. Ever seen an animal do something so smart it left you speechless? The desert night rolled in like a velvet curtain, heavy with the scent of cooling stones, sharp and clean, like the inside of a mason jar opened after years on a pantry shelf. Michael Cooper was a shadow of himself, his breaths shallow, each one tasting of dust and fading hope. The Mustangs hadn't budged, their silhouettes stark against the starlit sky, reminding him of the tin soldiers he'd line up on his bedroom floor as a boy, each one standing for something unbreakable. Midnight's steady gaze held trust, a silent vow that kept Michael tethered to life. But time was slipping. Could these wild creatures really pull off a miracle? Far off, the colt that had bolted earlier was tearing across the plains, his hooves pounding a beat like the thump of a jump rope on summer pavement. He reached a ranger station, a lone outpost where the glow of a single bulb flickered like a firefly caught in a jar. The colt didn't hesitate. He reared up, whinnying sharp enough to wake the dead, his call slicing through the quiet. Ranger Ellie Torres, sipping coffee that smelled of late-night diners, froze. A horse? Here. She stepped outside, her boots scuffing gravel, and saw him, wild, urgent, radiating communication. What was he trying to say? Back at the Juniper, the mares who'd run earlier returned, their coats lathered with sweat that glistened like dew on morning grass. They nickered softly, nudging Midnight, who snorted as if reading a map only he could see. Then, movement, hoofbeats again, but different, joined by the growl of a truck engine. The Mustangs parted, their eyes glinting like the coins Michael's grandpa used to flip for luck. Ellie's voice cut through the dark. "Cooper, you there?" It was rescue, guided by hooves and heart, unfolding like a story too wild to believe. Ellie and her team found Michael half-conscious, his wrists raw but his spirit clinging to the connection those horses had forged. They cut him free, the rope snapping like the crack of a screen door slamming shut, a sound of freedom. The Mustangs didn't scatter. They watched, calm, as if they'd always known this would happen. Federal agents later arrived, skeptical, their radios buzzing like the static of an old TV set. But even they couldn't deny it. These animals had orchestrated a miracle. How do you explain compassion that crosses species? As dawn painted the horizon pink, like the blush of a peach, just picked, Michael was loaded into an ambulance, his eyes locked on Midnight. The stallion tossed his head, a farewell that felt like a promise to meet again. The rangers stood in awe, their whispers mingling with the breeze. This wasn't just a save. It was a story that would ripple outward, challenging everything they thought they knew. What would the world make of these Mustangs now? Feel that moment, the truck's rumble, the Mustangs standing tall. Ever witnessed a rescue that felt like fate stepping in? 6 months later, the Nevada air carried the crisp bite of autumn, smelling of fallen leaves and chimney smoke, like the evenings Michael used to spend whittling sticks on his uncle's porch, the woods grain rough under his fingers. Michael Cooper was back on his feet, though scars still traced his wrists, faint as the lines on his mom's old recipe cards. He stood before a room of scientists and policymakers in Reno, his voice steady but laced with wonder, recounting the Mustangs' rescue. That day in the desert had sparked something, a need to prove those horses weren't just lucky, but bearers of intelligence and compassion. Could he convince a room full of skeptics? He'd spent months studying the herd, watching Midnight and his band roam the hills, their movements fluid as the folk songs that used to drift from his dad's guitar. Michael's report was no dry academic paper. It sang with evidence. Mustangs, digging for water, forming protective circles, running miles to summon help. He called it cognition, not instinct, backed by hours of video showing their deliberate choices. The room leaned forward, pens scratching like the rustle of corn husks in a breeze. This wasn't just about one man's life. It was about redefining wildlife. But would they listen? The data landed hard. Michael showed how Mustangs communicated danger, shared resources, even mourned lost foals, behaviors mirroring human empathy. He proposed a 3-year moratorium on roundups, those brutal sweeps that tore herds apart, and argued for bigger protected ranges. His words hit like the clink of a mason jar lid sealing tight, preserving something precious. A grizzled congressman, whose frown reminded Michael of his high school principal, nodded slowly. Could this be the start of protection? Pushback came, sharp as the sting of a winter wind cutting through a thin jacket. Ranchers argued Mustangs overgrazed, bureaucrats cited budgets. But Michael held firm, his eyes flashing with the same fire he'd seen in Midnight's gaze. He shared a photo of the herd at dusk, their silhouettes soft against a sky like stained glass, and asked, "What's the cost of losing this?" The room hushed, the air thick with transformation. A vote was called. Would it change anything? Spring. Michael's study had wings. His findings reached Capitol Hill, where lawmakers, moved by the story of a man saved by connection, drafted a bill. The vote passed, banning roundups and expanding Mustang sanctuaries. Michael stood outside the hearing, the city's hum fading as he pictured midnight running free. It felt like destiny had shuffled the deck and dealt a winning hand. What would this mean for the herds and the people watching them? Imagine that room, the weight of a story changing minds. Ever seen one voice shift the tide for something bigger? The Nevada plains hummed with spring's arrival, the air thick with the scent of wild clover, sharp and sweet like the jelly jars Michael's sister used to hoard for her toast at Easter brunch. A year after his rescue, Michael Cooper stood on a rise overlooking the Mustang sanctuary, his boots sinking into earth soft as the felt of his grandma's old sewing box. The bill had passed, land set aside, roundups banned, and the Mustangs roamed free, their manes catching the breeze, like the flutter of laundry on a clothesline from days gone by. Midnight led the herd, his stride proud, a living symbol of protection. But this wasn't just a win for the horses, it was humanity redefined. What did it mean to share the world with creatures this wise? Congress had named the law after Michael's story, the Mustang Compassion Act. It wasn't just paper and ink, it was recognition, carved from evidence of the herd's intelligence, their water sharing, their 24-mile run for help. Michael watched dignitaries visit the sanctuary, their polished shoes scuffing dirt, their murmurs blending with the hum of bees like the buzz of a county fair. Even the gruffest senator softened when a foal, wobbly as a toddler in new sneakers, nuzzled his hand. The Mustangs weren't just surviving, they were teaching trust. How long would this harmony last? Down in the valley, the herd had changed. Eguas, once wary, now let researchers near their newborns, their eyes calm as the glow of a porch light left on for company. A filly, born under a sky streaked like the watercolors Michael's mom used to paint, tottered toward him one dawn. He called her Dawn, and her shaky steps felt like a promise, a new generation protected. Midnight watched, nickering soft as the creak of a rocking chair, his leadership steady but gentler now, like he knew the world was listening. Could these foals grow up without fear? A research center rose nearby, its walls echoing with the clack of typewriters and the laughter of kids on field trips, a sound like the jingle of bike bells from Michael's old neighborhood. Scientists from across the globe studied Mustang communication, their notes piling up like letters in a hope chest, each one proof of cognition and empathy. School children planted sagebrush, their hands dusty, their voices bright as the pop of firecrackers on a summer night. The center wasn't just about data, it was conservation, a bridge between generations, human and horse. What stories would these kids carry forward? Michael, now graying at the temples, often sat with visitors, sharing the tale over coffee that steamed like the kettle on his dad's stove. The Mustangs had saved him, sure, but they'd done more, sparked a movement, a transformation. He'd look at Midnight, grazing under a sunset that burned like campfire embers, and think of his grandpa's saying, "Sometimes, the wildest hearts teach us to stay human." The sanctuary thrived, a testament to connection, and Michael knew this was just the start. What else could these horses show the world? See that filly stumbling toward a new day, feel the hope in those kids' laughter. Ever met an animal that made you believe in second chances? And there it is, friend, the story of Michael and the Mustangs, a tale of hooves and heartbeats that reminds us life's greatest lessons often come from the wild. It's about empathy, the kind that crosses species, and survival, not just of the body, but of the spirit. Those horses didn't just save a man. They showed us what compassion looks like, raw and real, like a hand reaching out when you thought you were alone. Sometimes the truest teachers have 4 legs and a stubborn streak. nudging us to live with our hearts wide open. So, what about you? Ever had an animal change your life? Drop it in the comments. We'd love to hear your story.